Evening, everybody. Just to inform you that this meeting is being visually and audio recorded for publication on the Thatcham Town Council YouTube channel. Warm welcome to Finance and General Purposes Committee to be held today, Monday, the 25th of April. We do, as you will spot, have a somewhat unusual situation in that I've taken the chair in the absence of the chairman, who is, however, in the meeting, but coming in from Zoom because he's managed to contract some nasty, horrible pandemic stuff. Somewhat unusual, but then we live in a mad world at the moment. Apologies for absence, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies received from councillors Jeff Brooks, Jeremy Cottam, Lourdes Cottam, and David Lister, and Councillor Simon Pike appointed as substitute for Councillor Lister.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest for any items on the agenda tonight? Thank you. Minutes. We are aware prior to the meeting of a couple of small typos, but other than the typos, could we take as read and confirm as accurate the minutes of the meetings on 25th October 2021 and 7th of December 2021? Thank you. Thank you very much. Those in favour? And similarly, can we receive and adopt the minutes of the Finance and General Purposes Working Party held on the 24th of January? Thank you. Seconder. Thank you again. Those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Item 4. Matters arising from the minutes. We obviously had the budget and precept rise with a 4.8% increase in band D, when inflation was just above that. It looks as though inflation is going to be considerably above that, but that was the information we had at the time. Are there any other matters arising?
No more from me.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Any matters arising from any members present? No, thank you. Right, we will now look at the budget report for the whole council budget. This item has two elements to it. There is the normal spreadsheet with the detailed breakdown line by line, and also very useful commentary prepared by Steve Tickle, the responsible financial officer, for which many thanks, Steve. That greatly aided the analysis. Is there anything that Madam Clerk or Steve you want to add to the report, or any further explanations?
Nothing from me.
No, nothing from me.
Okay, fine. Questions from, I'll take Councillor Dunn, then Councillor Cromley.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So on report 5AI, yeah, that's what we're on. Are we under item 2? It says revenue budget position. And it said when the budget was set for 21-22, it included an overspend.
Yes, so
it would have been. You don't budget an overspend, do you? You budget to collect that back out of general reserves.
ideally, the budget should balance.
Yeah.
But when we set the budget last year, the budget didn't balance. So it had a deficit in there, if you like, or an overspend. So
of which there were funds in general reserve to cover that overspend.
Yes. But I think the reason it was left, the point I was trying to make there was that the view at the time was that the RNA spend was likely to be higher than what we budgeted for. So yeah, it's rather an odd situation, but I think in this year's budget we did actually balance the budget. So that's yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, it would be funded from reserves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Cromley.
Just a general one, is any exceptional item of expenditure or saving that you feel that should be brought to our attention, newspapers?
Well, I think as I've outlined on here, there was quite a lot of volatility this year in terms of the budget with COVID. And there were some estimates put into the budget for contingencies, if you like, for the facilities income. And I think, as I also mentioned, we received a grant, we were successful in obtaining grants from the council for COVID, well, to cover really shortfalls on the facilities funding from last year, which because of the timing of the grants, we can't recognise the grant income until we've received it. So that helped us. That helped a lot in terms of income shortfalls this year, because I think, as I mentioned, we got the 17,000 COVID grant from West Berks. We put a 10,000 budget contingency in for volatility around facilities. And we also received a grant from Freedom Trust for the special events that the events team ran this year. So really, through those measures, we pretty much made up for the loss in income because of COVID, effectively, because of the halls not having the uptake that they'd had in previous years. I mean, the other items in here of interest are obviously the grants that the council's been successful, has bid for with a very high likelihood of success. But again, the funding hasn't been received. So things like the he says confidently and then forgets completely. For instance,
Is the still money from West Berkshire Council, isn't there, for the Turnfields Garden?
Yes, sorry. So the Turnfield, yes, the Turnfields Garden. So we have 15,000 grant requests come for covering 18,000 of expenditure for the new pathways outside. And also the welcome back fund. Sorry, so the welcome back fund. We've received a grant for 39,000 and we've spent just over 70,000. So there's another grant request going in for 27,000. Again, because we haven't received the grant, we can't actually account for that. So we've factored that into reserves. So I think that, along with obviously a very ambitious program around reserves, that we've spent probably 150,000 over the budget from last year. So there's been a lot of activity, a lot of and when we look at the reserves breakdowns, we'll see how that money was spent.
Do any of these grants have to be repaid?
I mean, I've got Councillor Dillon first, and then I'll bring yourself in.
Yeah, thank you. So it was just Steve, he said 39 grand grant for the welcome back, but in the paper it says also includes a £43,000 grant.
Sorry,
Is it 43? You said 39 in your comments.
So apologies on it came to the two came to 70. So yes, absolutely, you're correct.
Okay, cool.
Apologies.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Crummett.
We have all these grants, thank you. Do any of them have to be repaid when times are better?
No, I mean,
No.
the thing is, we haven't received the funds on the grants yet. So that's the obviously there's always an element of risk until you actually get the money in the bank. So,
but the COVID grant that we had from West Berkshire doesn't have to be paid.
Thank you.
The extraordinary circumstances in which we found ourselves. So essentially, we have a 9,441 overspend, which will come from the working capital balance of the general reserves, which will take that down to approximately 70,000. But as ever, I feel sure we'll be up and down by the odd thousand also in these figures.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't actually closed the year yet. So when these reports were produced, obviously we're still working on year end, but we're expecting to close the year tomorrow. But there's been very little movement on the figures that you've got in the report. So we'll yes, within a few £100, we expect to be around that figure. I think, sorry, the other thing I didn't point out on here were some of the additional costs in year, which was on the second page. So, for instance, we had things like security at the Park Mount play area. We had the visions of recovery, additional security to keep the site open. So there were legitimate things which were agreed beyond when the budget was set, if you like. So although we have overspent, there are a number of reasons and a number of decisions why we have overspent. That some of those are through obviously council decisions, and others are things that we hadn't budgeted for, things like the tree surveys and works, which was nearly £9,000 this year, which obviously we have in the budget for next year, but we didn't have a budget for that this year. So I think there are some very valid reasons as to why we are spent.
Although overall we were budgeting to overspend by 8,924, we actually overspent by 9,441. So we have 500 quid
over our projection.
Over our projections at the end of the second most extraordinary year that we will probably have financially as a council. I think Steve and Mel and the officers and of course councillors ultimately control these things should be congratulated hugely for bringing in an outturn that was so close to the original budget.
When you tell me the percentage, Chairman, I'll second it. Okay. Are you working out? No, that's scribbling away.
Now, what are we expressing a percentage of?
Yes.
The percentage of precept, the percentage of the entire budget, or the percentage increase on the overspend?
The percentage of how close we came to the prediction. So we were £500 out.
On what percentage? If we're talking about the entire budget, we are talking about something like 0.005%.
That's what I'll second.
I'm not intending, unless anyone wishes to, because obviously we'll have paperwork beforehand. I'm not intending to go page by page through this budget, unless anyone has anything particular they wish to draw out. So thank you again, Steve, for highlighting the particular aspects that needed to be looked at. We just review. We don't receive anything. Right. In that case, we will move on to item 5A. The reserves and sell money. As Steve said, we did commit and spend quite a chunk of the director's contribution, developer's contribution, sorry, money in this year. I think the wisest financial decision this council ever made was to join the British Toilets Association. It gave us a detailed critique of what needed to be done with the toilets, and resulted in we were saving something like £100,000 to do a total refurb of the toilets. They came in and actually said the toilets were in perfectly good condition compared to most councils, and therefore we didn't need to spend anything like. So that money has been spent, let's say, hopefully from the Welcome Back Fund, and actually used them the other day, and they looked extremely good. So I think the Town Centre Committee has also to be congratulated on the job that they did there. That obviously has resulted in a considerable decline in the sell money. Steve, is there anything you want to gain on the sell side of things to draw to our attention?
Yeah, just one or two things, if I may, Chairman. One, obviously, when we come to look at year end and our investments, clearly the money that we're spending from our reserves will reduce the amount of money that we have invested. And I think this week we transferred 100,000 out of the CCLA fund, so to balance our cash flow, if you like. So, obviously we are spending down the reserves. I think as I've mentioned already about the transfer of the expenditure of the Welcome Back Fund and the Turnfields pathways until we get the grant monies in. So we have to assume the worst case scenario for that. So i.e. that we don't receive the funds. So that money has been effectively charged to the 1920 SIL fund. And when we get the grant money in, we can obviously correct that situation. The other thing to mention, we also we've transferred the 2 civic allowances of the previous and current mayor into the reserves, mainly to obviously appreciate there's been difficulty to run events during COVID and etc. So it provides more time to make decisions on how those civic allowances should be spent. So there's 8,900 being moved out of revenue this year into the reserves for that. And the final thing really is just one of the changes in the budget setting process this year is that we also made decisions on the reserve spend for this financial year. So I think that's partly a reflection of the fact, obviously, the SIL receipts are coming down. And it is right that we spend the SIL monies because obviously they're time limited. But you know, we've looked to set a capital budget, if you like, alongside our revenue budget this year. So I've just mentioned in here that I've included in the commitments in the spreadsheet things like the Queen's Jubilee event. We'd agreed 13,000, an IT upgrade. There was an IT audit done this year, and quite a bit of the equipment is now out of date. Some money there for youth projects, for play area maintenance, and also for 20,000 for 2 new pieces of accessible play equipment. So, sorry. So that was all the points I was going to raise. Thank you.
Yeah, I think even with that commitment of new play equipment, and that has been a focus of this council, as we are aware, to improve the condition of the play equipment. Even with that, I think we will still have something like £50,000 of developer contribution money to be spent. And as Steve said, the last thing you ever want to do is give the money back to West Berkshire or to whoever it goes back to. So you have to spend it within the allotted period. Any questions on the reserves? Councillor Floyd.
Okay. There's an item on election expenses fund, and it says there was a spend in the year 2021-22 for a by-election, but I thought the by-election was actually much earlier than that.
Not 2019.
Yeah.
General election day 2019 was when Richard won.
If we can have the clerk to answer, please.
Yes, absolutely correct. We were approached by West Berkshire Council, who had picked up that they hadn't recharged for the election. So it came from this financial year.
Richard said he'd cover it.
So
there was something coming back.
it's West Berkshire's error, not the RFO's error. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or points on the reserves? No, thank you. We will move on then to risk management strategy 2023. To introduce this one, please, for us.
Members may recall at the last meeting the draft risk management strategy and the Finance and General Purposes Committee's risk register were presented for adoption, prepared by the RFO. Councillor Brooks raised some concerns with some of the scoring within both of the documents. We've taken them away, we've reviewed them, made some changes, and they are represented now. And both myself and the RFO are confident that they are an accurate reflection of the risks recommended for adoption.
Thank you. I certainly have not had any feedback from Councillor Brooks that he is still unhappy with. I am looking towards our leader to see whether he has had any correspondence or information from Councillor Brooks.
I've not received anything, Chair.
And I presume Madam Clerk, you haven't either. In the absence of Councillor Brooks, it's reasonable to assume that he is content with the revisions. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know how far down in detail one goes with the list on page 4. Should notice boards be in there as their own line item? We've got shelters and seats and bus shelters. I just wondered if you've got quite an array of notice boards around the town, haven't we? And they're not cheap from when we last replaced them.
We can add that. The RNA risk register hasn't gone to RNA yet, so we can add that in.
Yes.
We will add that in. Councillor Pike.
Thank you. I also wonder if we should include Hennick Worthy, because as the leaseholder legally, we might have some risk associated with that. It's complicated.
Sorry, just on that basis, I mean, we don't list individual parcels of land, do we here? There's not an appendices that says, and this is all town council owned land at all, that would be useful, is there? Maybe it shows owned and leased. The one I'm thinking of a liability was Browning Close. Not necessarily naming all the parks, but that's just a random piece of land that we own that we don't do anything with.
The appendix that
Yep.
information. Yeah.
Appendix that, thank you. And
There's one further item. I don't know if it's covered some under one of the other headings, or if not, where it would go, but the potential liability of councillors in their capacity as trustees of charities.
The Townfields Trust.
Parish Hall.
You do that in your own right, don't you?
Well, no, that's a council appointee.
Yeah, but you take the liability as an individual, I think, don't you?
Well, that's a question that I think we need to look at as a risk.
Yeah.
I think most.
Covered in insurance.
Yes. But I think it's a risk that, for example, if we were to renew the insurance, that it ought to be identified so that we know that that's something to be included.
We are doing something remarkably similar in part 2. He said this way what in part 2.
It didn't cost.
Can I just make a comment, because I think that's a very valid point. Actually, when I became the outside representative for Homestart, I said to them, I do not want to be a trustee. I think the previous representative had been, but with all the responsibility of a trustee, I said, no, I just want to be an observer on the board. So that I know and I can communicate, but I do not want to have the responsibility of being a trustee. And that might be something that we could do with other organisations, I don't know. So we're still there, but not as a trustee.
I'll just bring in the clerk up on on those points, especially the insurance question as to whether the council insurance currently or proposed covers personal liability of councillors acting as council appointees as trustees.
I believe it does. We would need to take that back and look specifically, but I'm pretty sure that it does. And therefore, if it's an insured risk, it probably ought to be in the risk register. So again, that's something that we can add in.
We will confirm that. Sorry,
Just to
Councillor.
say that in the case of the parish hall, the charity deed requires that the council's representatives are trustees.
And Memorial is the Memorial is the same. The foundation is the same. So we take that. Double check that we are
Yes.
covered under the council points.
Yeah.
With those amendments, obviously there will also be, I would imagine, some impact on the scoring. Scoring.
Is that this one now you're talking about? The impact on these?
It's the appendix A, I would imagine, in the risk register.
Yeah, that's this big spreadsheet, isn't it? Is it this one? I wanted to talk on this document as well, Chair, before we move off it, that's all.
Oh, right.
Sorry, Chair.
I think that is the risk register.
Yes, yeah.
We've got here the.
Yeah, we're just on 6I.
Strategy.
Yeah.
So, which does have some scorings within it. So it is just a question of whether it's happy with those additions, and for an appropriate scoring, I would suggest with the officers with the agreement of the chair and vice chair on the actual scorings and likelihood and impact, etc. If people are happy with that, I would suggest that as a way forward rather than necessarily having to take this away and bring it back to the next meeting of RNA. Any views, Councillor?
I was just going to mention one other item because I learnt that through the draft text for the annual report that Planning and Highways Committee is responsible for grip bins. And given that there is no other infrastructure and that responsibility, it probably ought to be listed. I don't think there's much risk associated with it, but because we have responsibility for some physical assets.
So is it the wish of this committee that this goes away and the final document is represented to the next meeting of F&GP, or are we happy with my alternative proposal?
I just, sorry to interrupt, just to say, the risk registers are living documents, and I think the difficulty is if we keep deferring. I think for me the strategy now proposes obviously the officers score. The risk register is now split up for every committee. So subsequently in this financial year, as the committees are chaired, they'll receive their section of the risk register to review. Some of the risks are quarterly, some of them are annual, but things will be added as we've discussed today. Things will change, but I don't think we're going to get a fixed. I think every time we present them, we're going to come up with something else. So it's yeah. So I guess that was the point I was trying to make. Just that please bear in mind it's a living document. So
thank you for that, Vice Councillor.
If your proposal was that this be presented to full council with the changes addressed that we've discussed to be addressed by the committee chairs before that, then I'd be happy to second that.
It is indeed my proposal. We wish to speak to that before we take a vote. No, all those in favour of that proposal, please. Thank you. We will then move on to the larger document, the P committee register. Councillor Denton, you've had some.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got an ID column. Yeah, so ID 40, which is on basically page 3. Just a tiny bit, it's got RFO and then in brackets Steve. None of the other columns do, so if you're going to sort it, it wouldn't necessarily come up when you're doing
that's not.
You can add it electronically. That's why I raise it.
Okay.
From a sorting point of view. But then on a more substantive point than that one, Mr. Chairman, under the financials, yeah, it's under 35, ID 35, which is the page over. Failure to keep proper financial records. It says clerk is appointed RFO and proper officer. But we split the roles up. So yeah, if we can change that. And then on some of these, and I won't go into detail, but on some of it says regularly do something. Or can we just stipulate what it is? Is it 6 monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? Regularly doesn't mean anything. I mean, it can mean once every 100 years. As long as you do it every 100 years, it's regular. So I'd like to see the proper timeframes. But around an example, I saw one in the financial one. I looked at the document electronically. I'm sure I can leave that point with you, Steve, can't I? I think they were the main comments, Chairman.
Thank you.
Me, I think.
Thank you. Any other comments? Are you happy, Councillor Dillon, with frequency of regularlies to be
Yeah, to be determined by the officers.
determined by the officer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Super. If there are no more questions, we are reviewing and adopting rather than sending to full council for adoption. Right. Thank you. In which case, can I propose from the chair that we adopt the financial risk register for this year?
I'll second it. I just don't know there's one more thing. If you're happy for me just to raise it with the officer afterwards, I don't think there's a substantive change to the document, Chair.
Okay, yeah, so that is.
I'll second that, yeah.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. And yeah. Laptops. Obviously, paper closed. Anything to add to that, Madam Clerk? Seems comprehensive.
To add to the report, Chair.
Any comments? Comments seems, oh, sorry, Councillor Foster.
I can't quite find it now, but there was a statement in here about using new laptops. But then, if I can find it, it actually refers to three. But can I find it? Three reasons for a laptop. So I think we're in here.
Yeah, please, Madam Clerk.
Yes, but one of them, we need two. So there won't be an occasion when they're being used at home and needed in the chamber. So
one of those would be.
One of those will be used in the chamber for meetings, yes.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Just one in terms of kit. I mean, is it possible to sort of put an order in and call it off when you need it? I mean, I suppose it takes a couple of days to build a laptop, you know, from orders. I mean, in an IT world. I just wonder in terms of, if it doesn't get used, would it be old by the time you want to use it? Whereas if you can get one that you can definitely call off. So almost we just give you the authority to make the purchase as you need it, just to make sure you can buy the most relevant tech at the time rather than have a laptop sat in a cupboard for potentially 6 months that you're not going to use. That was the only thing I was thinking about, but I'm happy to endorse the paper either way.
My only sort of reservation with that is if we close the office due to inclement weather, we might not get quite enough time to then order a laptop in and get it set up.
No, maybe not.
But
very rare you don't get at least 4 weather warnings though. Especially of a red one. I mean, Storm Eunice, we knew on the Tuesday it was coming and it hit on the Friday and Saturday. But no, I'm happy to second, but it was just to think in terms of the technology side, just didn't want something sat in a cupboard not being used really. Yeah.
Yeah, any views, Madam Clerk?
no, it's a very valid point. We would certainly be using one because as I say, one will be to manage council meetings.
Well, I think if we're happy to leave the actual purchase to the clerk.
I think it would also add as contingency for equipment failure, which we don't get a forecast for, unfortunately. So I know to my cost.
Probably got a service maintenance contract in place, haven't we? Sorry, Chairman.
Can I recommend then that, or propose that we authorise purchase of the laptops as per the 1,493 quote, which is already, as we have discussed, within the budget for the year, within the 7,500. If that finds a second.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you. Unanimous. Thank you. Thatcham Library, update on the position with Thatcham Library and the delay in the building work. Again, seems self-explanatory. I don't know whether the leader who was very involved within the discussions about the library wishes to say anything to this item.
I don't have anything else to add, Chairman. I think the report is, I should say, quite explanatory.
Okay, thank you. Any other points, Councillor Jeffrey?
Chairman, I certainly like the idea of the town council always doing whatever it possibly can to assist in the things within the town. I'm just wondering what's the mechanics of using the Thatcham Town Council chamber as temporary accommodation for the library. Not sure I've actually followed that point, and I don't see how it would work. May I ask the clerk?
Madam Clerk could update us with any discussions and thoughts.
Yes, so I had a telephone, Zoom meeting with Felicity. It's an option on the table whilst they look into more detail of how they can keep a library service going.
Yeah.
But they're thinking of mobilising the mobile library here more often, perhaps with some in the council chamber. It's just a work in progress at the moment.
Councillor Pike and then Councillor.
I was wondering if the Walnut Close facility might be usable, given that it's, I think, empty and owned by the council.
I think it's fairly dank at the moment, isn't it?
Well, there's
Another discussion point for the clerk with Felicity and Councillor Dunn.
The only thing I didn't get about the note, because it doesn't reference it, is who was at the meeting, because it says and you agreed, but it doesn't say this is a note to up. This isn't notes from a meeting or anything like that. Yeah, but for the minutes, could we just have, you know, when it was and stuff like that? Would be useful. Thanks.
Councillor Foster.
Can I just ask, if this is an option to use a chairman, would it then be out of action for use by us, or will the books just be? I mean, I don't know how much space the books take up, but does it mean that we would have to have our meeting somewhere else?
I did explain that the chamber would still need to be usable. So yes, we wouldn't be taking the chamber out of use. It may be that we have books on movable trolleys or something that we just push to the back.
Click and collect.
I was going to say click and collect seems to be the way forward. So we might be able to facilitate that within the chamber app, using the available space down the end of the chamber. Thank you. Any other comments? In which case I would propose that we note the update, if that finds a seconder. Councillor Cromley, thank you. Those in favour? Thank you. Right, we now come to the proposed list of backs payments due from the impressed account. So just for my own purposes as well as everybody else's, this is the document headed proposed list of payments entered. I'm looking at Steve for confirmation. Thank you. Again, we've all had the paperwork. I don't have to go through every page or every line. Are there any questions on any of the backed payments which are proposed? Councillor Jeffrey.
Elite Security, this is on page 2, halfway down. The 396 mobile security, I'm not sure if I'm getting the terminology or understanding the terminology. What does that 396 please apply to?
That is the security company that was doing the overnight lock-in. That was their final bill. It's not for the whole month of March because the service stopped.
Right. So that's payment. It's a payment for that service, and it's not a management fee or something like that. Right. Thank you very much indeed, Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Any other points, Councillor Crumb?
Yes, on page 1, halfway down, BH Doors, £896 described as motor replacement for door. Which building and where was that?
Yes, Frank Hutchins. We have an automatic door because obviously the therapy
Yeah.
centre are in there and it's ceased working, so it's to get it back into action again.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey.
And going on my favourite page, so page 2 again, if we just go down to Hanks, refurbished play equipment on the 18th of March, 081259. Which one was that, please?
I would imagine, Steve, by that figure, that's the Dunstan Green climbing units.
Oh, of course it is. Oh, of course it is. Thank you. Thank you very much.
These figures include VAT as well.
Yeah, yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you. On page 5, we have our payments to West Berkshire Council, including the large quarterly payment of rent to Birdwood. In terms of processing time, Steve, I mean, how much officer time would we save if we paid that annually and took the financial risk?
But this has come up.
This has come up before.
It has, yeah.
Jeffrey is
Yeah,
who raises that particular point.
Chairman, if I may, if I can sort of second that question, the note that I've got written down to myself is, shall we instruct our clerk to write to West Berkshire Council formally requesting an annual payment of £5, or indeed perhaps instruct our clerk to write to West Berkshire Council and tell them that we'd be happy to take the building over for 50 quid, 10 years payments.
We'll lose it off the asset register.
I would suggest that the latter goes onto an agenda for proper debate rather than being raised and launched on the council. Certainly, I think option 1 or idea 1 would seem to have considerable merit, if indeed the town clerk hasn't already done so. Madam Clerk.
I believe when this was discussed at the last meeting, it could have been yourself, Councillor Cole, mentioned that it might result in an amendment to the lease.
Oh, yeah.
He did.
Which does
He
say
did.
quarterly payments, but it's worth asking the question.
We pay in advance, then they can just draw down quarterly, can't they?
I think from memory, my memory is notoriously bad. I think we were talking about a variation of the lease rather than just a physical payment up front. I think a physical payment up front would not cause a problem with the lease, but yeah, I'm sure West Berkshire would be happy to receive that massive sum in advance. Yeah, with that proposal, we'll vote unless anyone wishes to me to do so, but that suggestion goes to the clerk. Any other comments or questions on the proposed back payments? No. In that case, I would propose approval from the chair, if that finds a second. Thank you. Those in favour? Thank you. And then the second item is the payments from the impressed account using the prepayment card. This is obviously for the smaller amounts. So this is the one, I think, that was the current account. This is payments made between 1st Jan and 31st of March. Thank you, Madam Clerk, for confirming. Any questions on this particular document and contents therein?
Can I raise one?
Councillor Bromley.
We got 2/3 of the way down, or 3/4 of the way down. Priory loan, 15,500. So that's the loan we're repaying to the Public Loans Board. I trust the Priory is still occupied and they're still paying the rent. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or observations on that one? No, again, then I would propose from the chair that we note, if that finds a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Those in favour, please. Thank you. Again, unanimous. Now on to Councillor Cromley's favourite one, bank reconciliation. The one-page document with cash and investment reconciliation as of 31st March. Again, any questions, Councillor Dunham?
Yeah, thank you. On bank statement balance line 3, the Soldo prepayment debit card, do we stipulate a limit on how much we hold on that card?
I believe so, yes, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Which document is this one?
Sorry, it's the one-page document, Richard, headed Thatcham Town Council Bank Dash Cash and Investment Reconciliation.
Right, sir.
Yeah, he's got it.
Yeah, that we hold. Give members a couple of seconds to put it down that one. As has been said by the RFO, the balance has obviously gone down because of the expenditures on play equipment and other assets for the benefit of our residents, mostly from the developers' contribution money, which has been discussed, I think.
It is about interest rates. I've had some circulars round from building societies and the like. You know, the interest rates, if you've got money on deposit, seem to be going up to reflect the fact you've got to pay a lot more interest if you borrow. Have we had notice that the money, some of the monies at least on deposit, are now attracting greater levels of interest?
I think, sorry.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so most of the investments are the interest rates are fixed annually. So the next rates which are coming up for renewal will be around August, September, so that there'll be an opportunity to look for better rates than we're currently receiving. But I think when we've had discussions in the investment committee, the Bank of England base rate was down to about 0.2%. 0.1. So the interest rates have been on renewal this year. The interest rates have been low, but as you rightly point out, they are beginning to rise. So there may be an opportunity in the summer to look to take advantage of that when our investments come up for renewal.
I think there is also the strategy, whether it was formally written into a strategy document, I don't think it was, but the strategy putting money on annual fixed term deposits while interest rates were going down was the right one. Now that we are, as you so correctly say, short in a going up, potentially going up, then we might look to not put items on 1 year deposit, but on a shorter term, say 3 months, to then take advantage of higher rates
each step.
Sounds good.
If there are no questions on, no further questions on the bank reconciliations, again, I would propose noting these from the chair. If that finds a second, Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. Those in favour, please. Thank you. And lastly, we have the aged debtor and creditor reports. If we have these correctly, the purchase ledger is going to be people that we owe money to, and the sales ledger, which is on the second sheet, third sheet, will be people who owe us money. I suppose firstly I might ask RFO to do on the ones where we owe monies. We have things like WBDC rates, where it looks as though we are over 60 days in payment. If Steve, you might be able to just explain how the bookkeeping system works.
Yeah, we tend to, as the rates relate to this financial year, we tend to pay the rates bills during April. So were they, if they weren't on this BACS run, I would suggest that we'll be on the next BACS run. So
do we pay those annually or do we pay those monthly? Because domestic rates are payable monthly, but
I think there's a combination of both, isn't there? I think.
Monthly.
Oh, it is monthly. Apologies. Yeah.
I think what normally happens with bookkeeping systems is it lumps the entire amount in for a long period, and it looks as though you've got a massively long outstanding creditor. The one I would ask about is the stage bus, which does seem to be a genuine over 122832. Is that again a similar factor, or is that one that we are in discussions with them?
That's a good question. Stage Bus, they're the company that we hire the stages for. We tend to pay 50% up front. So say, for instance, like the Christmas market, they will ask for 50% of the invoice to be paid now, and 50% obviously after the event has taken place. So I would suggest that the reason that they are there is that it's likely the other 50% of the payment, but I can look into that.
If you could just
come back on that.
Purely and simply in terms of corporate governance and paying money promptly that we owe. Councillor Dillon?
Yeah, no, I'd support that, Chairman. I think for any of them that are over 60 days, it'd be useful just to have a piece of commentary. Are we in breach of the terms and conditions? Because if it was 50% before, it might be then, and 50% payable within 28 days. And if we're over 60 days, we're in breach of our contract there as well. And then similarly, why are on the other one, why are people owing us money for 60 days? What's the debt collection process been for each of those lines? So have we sent out our invoices regularly? Because if we don't do that, then you can't necessarily call on the proof of chasing the debt. So it's just that, exactly as you say, Councillor Cole, that governance side. But I think anything that sits in that 60-day column, we should probably just have a 1 or 2 line commentary on each of those attached to this report.
If we could potentially do that.
Absolutely.
In future meetings, that would be very gratefully received. I've got Councillor Foster, then Councillor Pike.
I know I've asked this one before, but I think at full council, the status of Newbury and Thatcham funeral directors came up, and we asked because we were asked to write that one off, and we asked for a report on what measures have been taken. Is that bypassing this committee? It seems that this is a relevant place to hear that report before it goes to the full committee, but I don't know if that report exists yet.
Full council can't delegate writing off bad debts. It has to be a decision of full council. So Steve will be preparing a report to go back to the next full council meeting on that particular debt.
I suppose my question was really whether we would hear of it in advance, but because full council's next week, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, we'll get it back.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Councillor Pike and Councillor Dillon.
Thank you. So obviously we've heard about that particular case, but it looks like there are 2 other long-term debts from other funeral directors. So I wonder if this is because they are entities with which we invoice more than other types of entity, or is it a generic problem with funeral directors and the way that they run their businesses, possibly when they receive the payment?
Don't know if there is
That Camp Hobson.
we know instances that.
There's another one which is, I think it says fund director, but I think a fund care, but I assume that's funeral rather than
Thatcham fund care.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. If perhaps the RFO could have a look at our what we do with funeral directors and they're from.
They are notoriously slow to pay, but yes, that's no reason to say it's acceptable that they are slow to, we should. Well, yes, I'll look into that for the next meeting in terms of explanation. Yeah.
Excellent. Are there any other questions on the page creditor or debt list?
So yeah, so if full council do decide to write that debt off, can we then have a write-off section in this report as well, a cumulative write-off section? So we know how much we're writing off throughout the financial year.
So
Yes, yeah, I think on this, I think whatever actions we take have to be proportionate to the risk that we're running. I mean, as a rule, we're not invoicing high values and collection rates are very good. I think the example of the bad debt was a new SME that set up. So the question is, should we be giving credit to new startup companies in the area? And if so, what level should we accept that before we start bringing in controls in terms of 3 years of accounts? Are there any charges on the company? So there are lots of measures that we can introduce, but the question comes down to, are they proportionate to the risk that we have? And I think the whole time I've been here, I can't recall another bad debt write-off. So I think it is, the choice of, say, going to a debt collection agency is not something I guess the council's done before. So the skills to perform that are not here in house. So it comes down to that, the risk and what is proportionate in terms of what we're doing. So, obviously I'll cover this in the report. The other obvious thing is, if we go through debt collection agency, we will recover more than the original debt. So they're all the judgments that went through my mind as the RFO when I made the recommendation to write off the debt. So obviously I wasn't here in the meeting to make those comments clear. So, but I think ultimately it's the decision, as you say, of the full council if they want to pursue the debt. But for me, they're the judging factors in terms of whether we proceed. But I will include that in the report. Yeah.
Once a company's gone into liquidation, there is absolutely zero point in pursuing the debt because you're not going to get it back.
And we did stop. We also put a stop. Obviously, a business that needs a cemetery, if we put them on stop so they can't use the cemetery, and they still don't pay, and the title of the company is Thatcham, and they can't use the cemetery. I think we're kind of reaching a point where as you say, the business, we have to accept the business isn't running. But yeah.
So Councillor Pike, and then I have Councillor Jeffrey.
So I think I perfectly accept that particular case is not recoverable, but in terms of the funeral directors that are still trading and thriving, then the threat of a stop notice, because they may need to use the cemetery at short notice if a client arrives, then the threat of a stop notice might encourage them to settle their debt, because they would then risk being in an unfortunate situation with a possible client. That wouldn't require significant cost.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. That as I say, that is a measure that we used with this supplier before they went out of business. They came to us and asked to have additional access to the cemetery. We refused until they paid the debt. So it's yes. So that's
perhaps if that was.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Thank you.
Chairman, the only comment I'm going to make, I'm sure it has resonance around this chamber with the councillors, is there's something about a bad debt on a public body like us that goes, it sort of cuts a bit deeper than perhaps it would do if you were a business and you could just say, well, darn them, I'll never do business with them again. It feels a bit egregious when a business actually rips off the public realm, which we are a part of, or which we are part. And I suppose I'm only really saying that so that, as if they didn't know it already, that the clerk and the RFO are aware that, you know, we're spending a lot of time on it. I should think we probably spent as much time thinking about it, debating it, discussing it, and instructing things to be done about it as we would ever have gone back anyway. But it is because it just feels so darn cheeky, so inappropriate that the council, which is our community, is actually being ripped off by a business, even if it's not intentionally ripped off. So I accept that they must be in bad financial shape anyway.
I can assure you, everyone in the commercial world feels exactly the same. It's not just us. Councillor Pikeman, Councillor Drummond, I'm going to bring this to a close.
I was just going to suggest that it might be worth having a formal decision of this committee or the full council as to what that duration would be, so that if the decision arrives, then it's not purely an individual case. That if you have that, if it's not paid within 60, 90 days, define that in some, make that an official decision rather than an ad hoc decision of officers.
I think if you don't mind, we'll take that away and
Yeah.
discuss it, and then bring that back to F&GP for consideration. Councillor Drummond?
Yes, when this funeral debt came up, I mentioned before, and I mentioned now, that when you have a small limited company and you're not sure about whether they're going to survive or not, when you're invoicing them, invoice with their agreement at our insistence, not only the limited company, which is a separate legal body, but say a couple of the directors as well in their personal capacity. So there's 3 names on the debt. So if the company goes bust, the individuals still remain liable. Better chance of collecting from them.
Millard, 3 years. 3 years. Yeah.
Maybe don't get a letter off Richard in the post.
That would be interesting. I think we need to discuss that further with you, Richard, because the whole essence of limited liability is that people avoid doing exactly. But however, I will bring that to a close if I may. So can I again propose from the chair that we note the debtor and creditor report? Seconder, thank you. Those in favour, please. Thank you. Reports from town council appointees. Richard, anything to say?
No, the commission meets quarterly, and the timing isn't good because our next meeting is on Thursday. So any information I have is 3 months out of date. But essentially, during the last year, the debate has been about should they reinstate the park run. They're nervous about numbers exceeding what is appropriate on the way the park run's organised. There is no knowledge of who might turn up in advance. So they're allowing that to happen, but they're reviewing it every so often, so that's fine. There's been a debate about dog poo, which is endless, and West Berks Council quite rightly, I think, have said well, there's a certain number of bins, and we don't see why the ratepayer should pay for more bins. So really, we empty the bins that there are, but we really need to encourage dog owners to take their waste home, and I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't think there's anything more significant to say on that one.
Thank you. And your good self also on Homestart West.
And as you remember, during the pandemic, volunteers couldn't go into people's homes. That's all stopped, and it's where they're all back to normal. Essentially, able to do what they've always been doing, and they were worried about their funding, but they're on top of that too. So they're in good health.
Excellent, thank you. Nursing Society is Councillor Lourdes Cottam. I've had nothing. Reports, my clerk. Thank you. Thatcham Volunteer Bureau, Councillor Enning Cromley.
I just say I've spoken to her, though she's not attended a meeting since the last our last meeting, so nothing to report.
Thank you. Thatcham Youth, Councillor Lister, anything?
Nothing to report, Chairman. They have the annual meeting this Thursday. Whether I'll be able to attend is unlikely, but maybe Councillor Walker will be able to attend.
Thank you. And Suicide Prevention Action Group, Councillor McCarthy. Right. Can we come on to item 11, exclusion of press and public, to consider a review of the commercially sensitive nature of the business to be transacted. It is advisable public, press and public be temporarily excluded and they be instructed to withdraw. Councillor Jeffrey.
So proposed.
Thank you. Is that seconding, Councillor Dillon?
There's a question on it.
Question, indeed.
Happy to have the debate in part 2, but will we make a recommendation in part 1? Because the only bit that's part 2 is the cost, not our decision to make a recommendation.
Chairman, not at this stage, and that will become clear when we open the discussion.
Okay, are you intending for us to make a recommendation to full council in the debate? Okay. Happy to support or second Councillor Jeffrey's motion.
Yeah, the recommendation. Items of recommendation to full council.
But that has changed though, Chairman.
Oh, right.
In light that we haven't received all the information that we'd hoped to.
All right.
For this evening.
Okay.
Have we deferred it or are we in part 2 now?
We haven't passed the motion for exclusion yet, so we are still in part 1. So I will take the motion, if I may, to exclude press and public, which has been proposed by Councillor Jeffrey. If that finds a second, Councillor Dillon, thank you. Those in favour? Thank you.